Good afternoon, everyone. We're so grateful to Tim, Rob, and Iowa Power and Light for giving us this opportunity to think together about climate-informed ministry. I'm going to invite us to focus now a little bit, thinking about how we approach as spiritual leaders our pastoral care of those who have anxieties related to climate change. And my paper begins with a little vignette. They were standing at the end of their driveway, looking anxiously across the horizon for signs of smoke. The radio said the wildfire was 20 miles or so from their town, but the direction was still not sure. Joe slowed down his SUV to a stop and rolled down the window. "I'm going to the Albertsons grocery. Do you want to ride?" he said as if it were just another Wednesday afternoon. "Thanks. No," they said, still focusing on the horizon. "Okay," he smiled. "Have a good one." It seems to me that those of us who are Iowans have our eyes on the horizon a bit more than usual these days. The smoke from bitter county supervisor meetings about CAFOs and carbon pipelines is a whiff of the growing distrust even in our small, closely knit communities. The perennial inability of the Iowa legislature to address water quality while Iowans can't swim in our lakes or rivers is a regular reminder of the powder keg that is the urban and rural antagonism. Reactionary police and sheriff's departments stockpile military weapons in preparations for protests by a generation anxious about its future on the earth. Looking at the national horizon, our filmmakers are documenting the demonization of migrants from Central and South America and making films about civil war. I had the privilege of talking to some local young adults here in Grinnell, millennials and Generation Z, to tell me what causes them anxiety when they think about climate change. I had them write things down on little index cards. Here are some of the things that they wrote down. "It feels like climate change is going to determine what our lives will be like. I feel paralyzed, like it is beyond my control. How can regular people like me have an impact? We are worried about where we should choose to live. Instead of locating for career, should we be looking for places where we aren't going to be threatened by hurricanes or floods or fires? We've been talking about budgeting. If we can't afford insurance for our house, how much money are we going to need to save up to recover from a tornado or a flood? And how can we possibly save that much?" We actually had a conversation whether it was moral to have children when the planet is dying. Our generation feels a lot of political pressure. The decisions being made now will have an impact on our lives for decades. Our political decisions have heavier consequences. Climate change makes me worry about conflict between people who have money and those who don't. I don't want my children to live in a gated community. I feel so guilty what kind of earth we are leaving our children. I think if we invite the people in our churches, synagogues, mosques to speak from their hearts, we will begin to understand the destructive and paralyzing anxiety about the earth that grips our children, our young adults, and our elders. Although it is not immediately apparent, careful observers understand that much of the distrust, the suffering, the tolerance of violence, all has its source in an eco-anxiety. The threat to our land, water, air is an existential assault that Iowans feel today. They know it deep down, and they're having a hard time articulating it. and aren't given a lot of opportunity to speak about it. Many of my neighbors are really anxious about grocery shopping. Who knew that we would be standing in front of the shelves trying to decide if we could afford a dozen eggs this week? We rail against the grocery industry or some far-off policy set by the USDA. But again, careful observer will see a connection between the spread of avian virus among bird populations stressed by heat. More virus, fewer hens, supply cannot meet demand, and the price of eggs becomes a burden. I think Iowans' very real daily anxieties are often eco-anxieties, if we will take the time to see it. Spiritual leaders have the opportunity to connect the dots. We are still trusted by our communities. We are sought after in moments of distress. We have the confidence of our members, and we have regular access to a cross-section of the community that few people enjoy. We can give our communities framing words and hope-filled narratives for their anxieties. Weekly worship gives us an opportunity to connect the dots. I heard that in Diana's words to us this afternoon. Our weekly gatherings can be intentional events of lament, truth-speaking, and expressions of our common humanity. Words matter. Instead of general references to preserving the creation, we can voice a lament with the laborers who had to destroy a flock of chickens outside of Charles City this week. We can express gratitude for the scientists at the Animal Disease Lab in Ames who are researching the connection between heat and the avian virus. We can anoint or lay hands upon those Iowans who are elected to county, city, and state offices on November 5th, specifically invoking wisdom for the restoration of the earth. Karl Barth famously admonished Christian preachers to prepare their sermons with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in another. When our sermons, our liturgies, our prayers name the Iowa particulars, we teach that our faith has real-world implications. Recent social science research confirms that our faith communities, something that we have known for millennia. Gratitude heals anxiety. Forming habits of gratitude as individuals, households, and congregations will lift our eyes to the mercies and mystery of an ecosystem that sustains us. We are held by Brother Sun and Sister Moon. Gratitude fosters the symbiosis that sustains and heals humankind and the good earth. Each of our traditions undoubtedly has rich resources of scripture, poetry, song, prayer, and meditation that fills souls with gratitude, and thus create souls that have less room to harbor anxiety. I think that spiritual leaders can help faith communities develop habits of curiosity, listening, having difficult conversations, and patience seeking consensus. We will profit from spiritual leaders who will leverage the latest disagreement or turmoil in the church or synagogue or mosque into a teachable moment. We can teach skills of engagement that doesn't give up on people who see things differently. Learning how to come to consensus, our communities will rediscover the rich rewards of united action. Further, spiritual leaders often have the capacity to bring people together across economic, social, and partisan divides. We have connections to expertise in universities, in industry, or seminaries, other advocacy groups. Like the switchboard operator of old, we plug the farmer into the expertise of the practical farmers of Iowa. We can plug the landowner into the Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. We can plug the elected leader of the town or city or state with the nonpartisan research group. We can plug the neighborhood associations of Black and Latina households who disproportionately suffer the ills of climate change with like-minded groups across the divides of race and class. We can plug the congregation with theologians and vision casters from within and outside of our own faith tradition. You know, a key therapy for anxiety is defining the threat and building skills to respond to it. Spiritual leaders help their congregants objectively name the threat and then plug the community into just such skill-building resources. Well, remember SUV Joe at the end of the driveway? It turns out that he was on his way to Albertson's grocery to transport food to an evacuation center in a nearby town. That brief encounter at the end of the driveway had a curious impact upon his neighbors in two ways. His non-anxious presence, his smile, lowered the temperature of their anxiety. His focus on what would be useful at that moment in that situation inspired in them realism and a reason for hope. Joe lifted the eyes of his neighbors from the near horizon to that future horizon, the Tikkun Olam, the nations gathered at the river of life, the beloved community, the dwelling of the divine. So I'm especially addressing the spiritual leaders who are here this afternoon. You are the non-anxious presence. You are the sleeved, rolled up realists. You are the gifted messengers of a divine hope. For at least 4,000 years, humankind has reserved a place for a few individuals in each society to be set apart. We ordain them to live on the edges of the community as keepers of wisdom who are charged with focusing on the horizon. Well, many of us are just such privileged people, and it's a humbling place to be. We are entrusted with the responsibility of observation, insight, formative ritual, and faithful action. We have the privilege of pointing to that more distant horizon where the divine desire for harmony joins with the restored earth, and the divine desire will be fulfilled. So I conclude by thanking you. Thank you for taking your time this afternoon to think about these important matters. Thank you for responding to the eco-anxiety in your own community. May you embrace this work with confidence and peace.